So it's December, and I started thinking to myself, what kind of videos can I do this month? Something wholesome, nice, and Christmas related. But then, the more I thought about it, I'm doing a lot of Christmas videos this month, as I do every month. And for whatever reason, I started thinking about the Disney films, you know, the ones that we all grew up with. The more I was thinking about it, they're wholesome all the time. They don't wait 1 month a year to shine all the magic and goodness of humanity on us. They have to be whimsical all year round, and that can't be easy. So I decided, I'm just gonna review all the Disney films. That is to say, all the animated 2D Disney films, with some exceptions. Why? Because I love Disney, and so do you. Oh, you may act like you don't like Disney. You may talk about how it's an evil corporate monster that only gets stronger and stronger the longer we live. But the funny thing is, you don't have a choice. You can bombard us with all the genius, monstrous things that Disney has done in the past. You can argue debatable messages. You can argue debatable ethics. You can even argue debatable stereotypes. But it doesn't matter. Disney has always been there. For most of us, it's the first thing we're introduced to. And that's the genius of Disney, putting all their time and all their effort not in something adult, but in something for children. And once something has your childhood by the it's never gonna leave you. It's there forever. Disney has practically become family to us. It's fairy tales, it's magic, it's everything that we enjoyed and thought was possible when we were younger. And as we grow older, there's a lot of other things to enjoy. The artistry, the creativity, the imagination. There's literally no other word for it but Disney. It's an artistic cultural phenomenon that'll never ever leave. Now I'm just gonna state up front that I am directly ripping off Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, where James Rolfe reviews a new monster movie every day of October. I think it's a cool idea, and I wanted to do it with something I really enjoy, the hand-drawn animated Disney films. The only downside is there's only so many days in December and there's just a friggin' buttload of these movies. So I'm probably gonna do about 3 a day, and once or twice I may skip over one. But I'll do my best to comment on as many as possible. And keep in mind, this is just my own personal opinion. If you like or hate any of these films, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just putting out there what I think of some of the most beloved classics of all time. So, sit back and enjoy the month of what I like to call Disneycember. Let's start off with the very first animated film ever made, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We often associate the Disney formula with a princess in a big castle and some sort of far-off fairy tale. And even though not all the films are like that, in fact probably not even the majority, that's the one kids seem to like the most, and it started at the very beginning. Disney knew then that the more timeless you can make something, the longer it'll be around, so logically it makes sense to start off with a fairy tale. And as a first film goes, it's pretty impressive. I mean, okay, it's not entirely timeless, I mean the designs are kind of 40s, some of the characters aren't as developed as children's films are today, and Snow White's singing voice is very Betty Boopish. To describe the story is almost silly. We all know it. An evil queen wants to be the quote-unquote fairest of them all, but finds out that there's only one young woman in her way, the Princess Snow White. So she sends a hunter out to kill her, but the hunter is just so blown away by how hot she is, he can't do it. So he tells her to run away, and she comes across a cottage filled with 7 dwarves. Which for me as a kid always raised a lot of questions. Are the dwarves related? Are they brothers? Did they all just meet at random? If so, is there a place where dwarves just usually meet? Well, I'm overanalyzing. The queen finds out that Snow White is still alive and puts on a disguise to try and kill her. Kinda strange that she wouldn't just send a henchman or somebody else to do it. I mean, does she only have just the one? But again, overanalyzing. The film is about as basic children's movie as you can get. It's very bright, it's very colorful, but it doesn't try to insult the audience intelligence either. As Disney princesses go, Snow White is probably one of the weaker ones, as she is sort of just bland and general nice. But on the upside, she is generally nice. There's nothing really wrong with her, she's just not particularly interesting. To be fair though, she's a lot more engaging than the prince, who only gets about 3 lines, and most of them are just sung. The dwarfs, of course, is what everybody remembers. The different personalities, the different ways they're drawn, the fact that their emotional status also happens to be their names. That's what the kids enjoy. Adults can enjoy the artistry a little bit more. Not just the bright colors and pretty background, but also some of the scary images they have. While the story itself is not especially dark, it was pretty to throw in some of this really creepy imagery. The queen as a villain, when you really analyze it, is a pretty boring villain. She doesn't say much, she doesn't do much. Just a really vain woman is nothing really that fascinating in a kid's film. But what keeps her pretty enjoyable, again, is the animation. She's just drawn great. I mean, she has this permanent frown on her face. I'm trying to think if I ever saw her smile in the film. And of course, the design of her after the transformation is just awesome. It used to scare the out of me when I was a kid. But in general, does Snow White hold up as a film even if you emotionally disconnect it from the fact that you saw it when you were a child? Well, the key word there is emotion. Much like The Wizard of Oz or even Where the Wild Things Are, this is a film that is entirely fueled on emotion. Logic plays very little part in it. And to be honest, I find films like that very fascinating. They don't give you what you logically or ethically want to see, they give you what your emotions want to see. Like the prince comes, kisses her, and they ride off into the castle. Well, okay, how did he find her? Where did he come from? Did they ever have a conversation in the movie? Does it make sense that they would ride off together? Of course not, but that's not what your emotions want to see. They want to see the happiest of endings after the saddest and darkest of moments. Oh, yeah, don't think this scene didn't me up. You can keep Bambi's mom, you can keep Simba's dad. This is the scene that rips me to shreds. Why? Because it's like a wake, literally down to the organ music. How much more depressing can you get? The dwarves aren't just crying, they are sobbing, bawling over the fact that they've lost the only woman that's ever come into their lives. So of course as a young boy, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm tough, it's just a cartoon. It ain't gonna leave an impact on me. Oh no, not Grumpy. Not Grumpy, no, he was the tough one. Not Grumpy, not Grumpy. No, there's no hope for humanity! But that's just how the film works. It did well to help kids emotionally connect with things that we weren't often used to connecting with. And sure, she comes back to life, they live happily ever after, but we didn't know that. Even if we did, this is still a pretty sad thing to go through. For a little kid, this is pretty heavy. So, apart from it just being groundbreaking as the first animated film, I think actually it does hold up for little kids, and I'd even argue adults. Is it complex? No. Is it engaging? No. But its emotional simplicity does manage to tap into the audience, to a point where we're not even questioning the obvious logical problems that are just staring us in the face. Creating a world for us where happily ever after is okay to believe in. Snow White was mostly fueled on emotions, Pinocchio is very similar. It's not even really based on a fairy tale, it's based on a book, and a very odd, deranged, dark book as well. Yeah, the movie's dark too, but good God, the book's downright sadistic. Where in a fairy tale, you just know it's sort of a magical world where magical things can happen. This world treats it a little differently. I mean, there are magical things, like the blue fairy that brings a puppet to life, but then how about the fact that there's just a fox and a cat walking around like normal people? I remember how blown away they were that they saw a puppet boy walking around, and all I could think to myself is, why isn't anybody blown away that there's a giant fox and a giant cat just walking around? Well, it's just that kind of world where things like that can happen. And if there's anything Disney is good at, it's having us go along with things that don't make sense. And this movie does it pretty well. Geppetto makes a puppet boy, wishes one night that he were real, and the blue fairy comes and makes it happen. It's ironic because probably the film should be centered around Geppetto. He's the one that has a past. He's the one that actually has some character. Pinocchio is just sort of born with his personality. So the fact that he has to learn lessons and be given a conscience is kind of strange because the Blue Fairy just sort of made him up, didn't she? If you want him to learn lessons, why didn't you just have it where the lessons were already learned? But again, I'm totally overanalyzing this. Pinocchio comes across a bunch of strange adventures and learns a bunch of lessons along the way. And the visuals they use to have him learn these lessons sticks with us even today. The nose growing longer when you're lying, turning into a donkey when you've been bad. You don't forget strangeness like this that often. Pinocchio is a pretty likable character, and I like the fact that they do make him, for lack of a better term, a real boy. He isn't just pitch perfect, he is gullible. He does want to do bad things sometimes. It doesn't mean he's a rotten kid, it just means he's a kid. What sets him apart though is that he does learn his lesson and he does try to do better. He has a conscience named Jiminy Cricket, who, I'm just gonna say out there, I never enjoyed, even as a kid. Yeah, I know that means I have no heart and I'm going to hell or whatever you want to say, but I just don't like this guy.
When you get in trouble and you don't know right from wrong, give a little whistle.
I just didn't find that charming, I didn't find him that funny, his voice sort of grated on me, but he sings that one song and everybody's putty in his hands. I don't know, I was always waiting for Pinocchio to step on him. Again, the creepy imagery is sort of upped in this movie, much like it was in Snow White. Except this time, instead of everything always turning out okay, this time it wasn't always okay. A bunch of misbehaving boys are brought to an amusement park and then turned into donkeys where they're gonna be used in mining shafts. And that's it! You never see them again! The guy running the place is never defeated, the boys can't talk anymore. God knows what they're doing with the ones who can. It's pretty friggin' grim as kids' films go. The rest, however, does come back to the typical Disney formula. After a relatively exciting climax, Pinocchio gets smashed into a bunch of rocks and loses his life. Again, he can spin his head around, but some rocks kills him. I don't know. But the blue fairy comes back and sees his sacrifice and brings him back. Everybody in the audience is filled with joy, and of course Jiminy Cricket sings that song that nowadays is almost causing some controversy. Okay, not major controversy, but people have been debating whether or not this is a good message. This is the song that Disney used all the time. It's practically their biggest trademark. But some people think that it just promotes laziness, or a lying belief that everything will be okay if you just believe hard enough. Well, you could make that argument. I have yet to see a kid that totally fell for this. Or even more depressing, an adult. I think kids are smarter than we give them credit for. Kids are always going to be aware that there's bad things in the world. There's things they're going to be afraid of. And that closing their eyes and wishing isn't always going to solve their problem. I think most people connect to it because it's a symbol of hope rather than realistic planning. That sometimes unexpected good things can happen, and they can come out of nowhere. They can come when you least suspect it, so never give up the idea that all hope is gone. I don't know. That's what I got out of it, and I think that's what most people get out of it. And I think that's what most people get out of the film as well. It runs the Disney gamut that most of us enjoy. At times bright and colorful, but at other times dark and scary. Threatening and doubtful, but always with that ray of hope that sees us through. Doesn't always make a whole lot of sense, but they create a world where it doesn't need to. It's a world where anything can happen, even when you least suspect it. Riding high with the success of Snow White and Pinocchio, it's interesting that Disney decided to do something 100% different for their third film. Fantasia doesn't have a narrative story. It doesn't even have any dialogue apart from the host. It's just an experiment of taking classical music and combining it with great Disney animation. It's not one story, it's several stories. And half the time, they're not even really stories. The opening is just a collection of abstract imagery that goes along with the music, like what your mind might be thinking when hearing it for the first time. And I friggin' love it. It's not just one of my favorite Disney films, it's one of my favorite films, period. Remember what I was saying before about emotional simplicity? You could argue that this is the film that masters it. Whereas I describe both Snow White and Pinocchio as emotional stories, this is what I like to call an emotional experience. It's not based on narrative as much as moments. And life is made up of very unique moments, so I don't think there's really any problem in putting them together in a movie. Especially if they do get an emotional response. Sometimes it creates a confusing response, like the one with the dinosaurs. I never know how to feel watching that. Sometimes they're threatening, sometimes they're cute, and then through the course of the piece, they're just gone. I remember as a kid, I had no idea what to think of that. It's just sort of something that happened and you draw your own conclusions. Some definitely do have a flowing narrative, like the most famous one, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. This is actually how the film came about. Disney just wanted to make this short with Mickey Mouse as a magician. But as the expenses for it got bigger and bigger, they finally just shrugged and said, hey, why don't we do a couple of these and just turn it into a flick? The result is some booming, fantastic music with some booming, fantastic animation. I think sometimes just the falling of leaves can be so much more powerful than the emotional conflict that a character is going through. If the film is done right, it can suck you into something so simple and yet so oddly profound. And Disney animators were great at that. They could find the ballet, the movement, the music, anything that was poetic in, well, really anything. Even just the changing of seasons. I stated this before, but my absolute favorite is the ending. Both The Night on Bald Mountain and the Ave Maria. Even if you don't have a religious background, just the very basic emotional levels they have here are really high. The contrast in putting these two together is just brilliant, and the belief in something much darker than you can imagine, or more inspiring than you can imagine, is definitely there. Disney wanted to do a lot more of these and have this be a continuing film series. But sadly, the film didn't make the money that it needed. Oh, it made a lot of money. It was like the second or third highest grossing film that year, but it didn't matter. The film cost a fortune to make, and financially, it just didn't make sense to make any more. They did make one sequel years later, though we'll get to that when we come around to it. For this film, though, Fantasia is a powerhouse of art. In fact, it's actually like going to an art museum, except with motion and music. As you can imagine, though, it's not as geared for kids as the other Disney flicks. There's nothing really troubling or bad about it that kids can't watch. I remember watching Bald Mountain Find when I was younger. But with the exception of maybe Sorcerer's Apprentice, there's nothing here that's immediately geared towards them. This was the animated Disney film almost strictly for adults. And while kids could watch it, it wasn't exactly their film. It was more for the grown-ups, and those who love it really love it. And it still continues to be one of my faves.